Snow fell quietly over the battlefield. The wind was sharp, cutting through the broken metal and fallen bodies scattered across the icy valley. Private Ethan Cole moved carefully through the wreckage, his breath clouding the air with every step. His squad had been ambushed during a scouting mission. Now he was the only one left, limping through unfamiliar snow-covered territory with a half-burned blanket, a cracked helmet, and a fading emergency signal. The planet was called Drea 4, a frozen moon on the outer rim. What was supposed to be a peaceful mission had turned into chaos. The locals, half-beast, half-human aliens, had not welcomed the humans. They had howled under the moon, launching surprise attacks with sharp claws and glowing eyes. Ethan was bleeding from his side, the wound burning against the cold. He staggered near a rock formation, trying to set up shelter. That's when he heard it low growling, deep and close. He turned quickly, weapon raised, but it wasn't a full-grown soldier coming at him. It was a young alien girl. She looked barely an adult by human standards. Her snow-white fur glowed softly under the moonlight. Her tail twitched. She was injured too, one leg limping as she dragged herself forward. But her bright teal eyes never left his dot. Ethan didn't fire. She didn't attack. They stared at each other in silence. For a strange moment, it felt like the war didn't exist here. Just two living beings, both cold, both hurt, both alone. The alien girl collapsed first. She fell in the snow just a few feet from him, shivering badly. Her breath was ragged. Ethan lowered his weapon, slowly moving toward her. He remembered the survival training. Use anything you can to conserve heat, even an enemy, if they're alive and not a threat. He crouched beside her, wrapping the half-burned blanket around her small frame. She flinched but didn't growl. Her fur was soft, almost glowing. Ethan sat close, his body heat slowly making a difference. She blinked up at him, confused at first, then closed her eyes and rested her head on his arm. The snowstorm grew stronger around them. Ethan didn't sleep. He just stayed there, holding the enemy girl close, sharing the heat, hoping to survive the night. When morning came, the storm had stopped, and the alien girl was still beside him, eyes now open and staring at him differently. She made a sound, something soft, like a hum, then lightly tapped his chest. Her claws were careful. She sniffed the blanket, sniffed him, then wrapped her tail around his waist. Ethan didn't understand what that meant. But she looked serious. She stood slowly, then turned, giving a low chirp as if telling him to follow. Ethan didn't move. He had a beacon to fix, a mission to complete. But the girl turned again and looked back with eyes that said something. More something personal. He stood. They walked together across the snow, side by side, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Wherever they were heading, it wasn't back toward the war. It wasn't toward orders or commands. It was toward something else. Something neither of them understood yet. But the way she looked at him now, like he had given her more than just warmth. He had no idea that to her people, sharing warmth under a blanket wasn't survival. It was mating. And in her eyes, they were now bonded. Forever. And Ethan had just become the mate of a royal werewolf. Girl of Drea 4. Ethan followed the alien girl through the snow-covered valley, still unsure if he was making a mistake. His weapon was strapped loosely to his side, but he hadn't needed it since the night before. The girl walked ahead of him with slow but sure steps, her tail swaying gently. Behind her, she still wore the half-burned blanket over her shoulders like it was something sacred. She didn't speak his language, but every movement she made seemed to say something. She wasn't leading him toward danger. Instead, she took him to a narrow cave hidden between two ice-covered cliffs. Inside, the wind didn't reach them, and the warmth from a crack in the rocks gave off a soft heat. She carefully pushed some rocks away, revealing old furs and cloth piled together, her old shelter. Ethan sat beside her as she curled up next to him. her tail wrapping around his legs once again. She reached out and gently touched the blanket, then tapped her chest and then his. It was a gesture filled with meaning, but Ethan didn't understand all of it. Still, he nodded slightly, offering her a tired smile. She made a soft sound, something between a purr and a sigh, and leaned against him again. Hours passed. Ethan used a few tools from his broken gear to fix his emergency beacon, but the signal was weak. The nearest human base was too far for a quick rescue. He was stranded. And yet, he didn't feel alone. She began bringing him food, dried roots, frozen meat, and strange berries. He shared his rations in return. The more days passed, the more her behavior changed. She would watch him closely when he slept, follow his every move, and hiss softly whenever he stepped too far outside the cave. She was protective now, possessive. One night, Ethan sat near the fire, holding a sharp rock to shave ice from his boots. She came closer and sat in front of him, her glowing eyes fixed on his hands. Then, without warning, she gently took the blanket from her shoulders and placed it over both of them. She leaned in and pressed her forehead to his chest, then gave a low, deep growl. It wasn't a threat. It was a claim. Ethan blinked, stunned. He tried to step back, but she held his arm, her claws barely pressing against his skin, not to hurt, just to hold. "Hey," he said quietly, "I'm just a soldier. I'm not yours." But she didn't understand the words. She just stared into his eyes, her ears tilted forward, her tail curling tightly around his back. To her, the message was clear, the warmth they shared. The blanket. The closeness. It wasn't survival. It was a bond. In her culture, it was something sacred. Ethan felt a strange weight in his chest. He didn't know her name. Didn't even know her language. And yet she looked at him like he had saved her soul. Later that night, he heard howling from far in the distance. Several voices, her ears twitched. She stood, sniffed the air, and then turned to him with worry in her eyes. She made a soft sound, one he hadn't heard before, a whimper of fear. Then she did something that froze him. She stood in front of him, claws ready, and growled toward the cave's entrance. She was preparing to protect him. Her own kind was coming, and she was choosing him. Ethan stood slowly, unsure of what would happen next. But one thing was clear now. To her, they were not strangers anymore. They were mates. And nothing would change that. The growling wind outside the cave changed. It no longer sounded like just the storm. It carried voices now, howls, barks, and strange alien calls that echoed through the mountain pass. The alien girl stood at the entrance of the cave, fur rising, ears alert, tail stiff behind her. Her body tensed like a soldier about to face war. Ethan moved beside her, holding his weapon low. He didn't want to use it, but he also didn't want to die if her people decided he was the enemy. 3 tall figures stepped out from the snow. They were like her, furred, sharp-eyed, part wolf, part humanoid, but older and bigger. One had a long scar across his muzzle. Another carried a thick staff of bones. Their eyes glowed in the snowstorm like green fire. They growled and spoke in their strange language. Their tone was aggressive, angry. One of them pointed at Ethan and snarled loudly. The girl stepped forward, raising both arms wide in front of Ethan. She growled back louder and deeper than before. It wasn't just a protest. It was a warning. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She was claiming him. The way her body stood between him and her people, the way her tail stayed wrapped around his leg, the way her hand reached behind and held his arm tightly, all of it said one thing: he is mine. The leader of the group, the one with the scar, snorted. He circled slowly around them, sniffing the air, eyeing Ethan with suspicion. He spoke to the girl in short, firm words. She replied with sharp tones, never backing down. Then the old one with the staff spoke. His voice was slower, calmer, filled with weight. The others listened. After a long moment, he stepped forward and touched the burned blanket still wrapped around Ethan's shoulders. He looked at the girl, then at Ethan. And then he gave a slow nod. Ethan blinked in surprise. The girl made a soft, relieved sound. The tension dropped from her shoulders. Whatever had just happened, the pack had accepted her claim. They left as quickly as they came, melting back into the snowstorm like shadows. But before they did, the older one stopped and looked at Ethan again, long and hard. It wasn't just a glance. It was a warning. Ethan had no idea what it meant, but his gut told him it was serious. After they were gone, the girl leaned against him, her body relaxing. Her ears flattened back gently as she pressed her head to his shoulder. Ethan sat down, trying to process everything. "They think we're bonded," he muttered, mostly to himself. She purred softly, clearly pleased. He looked at her. "Do you even understand what this means for me?" She didn't answer. She just curled up beside him again, eyes closed in peace, as if the world outside no longer mattered. Ethan knew something had changed. He wasn't just a lost human soldier anymore. He had been accepted into something deeper. Something wild. And it had started with a simple act of kindness, sharing a blanket on a cold night. Now that single act had tied him to her, and to her people, whether he was ready or not. And deep down, he wasn't sure if he wanted to break free. The next morning, Ethan woke up to the sound of snow being crushed under feet, many feet. He sat up quickly, heart racing. The alien girl was already standing, her ears twitching and tail alert. She gave him a short look, one that said, "Stay calm." More of her kind had arrived. Not warriors this time, but elders. Some had feathers woven into their fur, some carried strange glowing stones. They moved in a slow circle around the cave, eyes full of quiet judgment. Ethan stood beside the girl. He didn't feel like a soldier anymore. He felt like someone being judged for something he didn't understand. The oldest elder, the same one with the staff from before, stepped forward and pointed at Ethan. Then he pointed at a hill not far from the cave. The girl growled softly but didn't argue. She looked at Ethan and gently touched his hand. She wanted him to follow. They walked together to the hill with the others watching from a distance. At the top, there was a ring of frozen stones and a pit of burning embers inside. Strange markings were carved into the snow around it. This was not just a hill. It was some kind of ritual ground. The elder raised his staff and shouted a single word. Then he pointed at Ethan's chest. Ethan didn't need a translator. This was a test. The girl stepped forward and howled something strong and proud. The elder looked at her with respect, but his face was firm. This was tradition. It had to be done. The girl turned to Ethan and placed the blanket, the one they had shared, over his shoulders. Her eyes were serious now, not playful, not soft. She pressed her forehead against his and held it there for a moment. Then she stepped back. The trial began. Ethan had to walk barefoot through the ring of fire and ice, crossing both freezing snow and burning embers, one after the other, with nothing but instinct and courage. The pain hit instantly. First the ice. It froze his skin, biting deep into his nerves. Then the fire. His feet screamed with heat. But he kept walking, his teeth clenched, vision blurred. He didn't stop. He didn't know what this test meant to them, but he knew what it meant to her. It meant belonging. It meant protection. It meant he wasn't just a human lost in the cold anymore. He was something more now. When he stepped out of the ring, the crowd was silent. Then one by one, the elders raised their hands and howled into the air. The girl ran to him and threw her arms around his chest, pressing herself into him with joy. She whispered something in her language, soft, gentle. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. "You're mine now." They returned to the cave together, where she cleaned his wounds with care. She sat close to him the entire night, feeding him warm soup made from roots and herbs he didn't recognize. Her tail never left his lap, He looked into her glowing teal eyes and saw something that made his heart race. Not fear, not confusion, but something close to peace. Ethan had come to this world as a soldier, but now he was part of something ancient and wild. And the alien girl, who had once been just an enemy hiding in the snow, now treated him like the most important part of her world. Days passed, and the cold no longer felt like the enemy. Ethan's feet still hurt from the trial, but the alien girl, whom he now called Laura in his head, since her real name was impossible to pronounce, took care of him like a mate would. She cleaned his wounds, kept him warm, and watched over him while he slept. In return, Ethan helped fix tools in her cave, reinforced the walls with gathered metal from broken drones, and even built a small fire pit using pieces of his crashed tech. The bond between them grew, even without words. One morning, Laura pulled him by the hand and led him to a narrow ridge behind the mountains. The climb was steep, and Ethan nearly slipped twice, but she stayed close, making sure he didn't fall. When they reached the top, he froze. Below them lay a hidden valley covered in ice blossoms, glowing blue flowers that shimmered softly under the pale sun. Laura stretched her arms wide and howled proudly. Then she looked at him, smiled, and pressed the blanket into his hands. This was her territory. And by giving him this place, she was sharing her world. Ethan stepped forward, slowly taking it all in. He had never seen beauty like this. It wasn't just the glowing flowers or the mountains behind them. It was the way she stood beside him, confident, proud, full of life. He looked at her and smiled back. She leaned close, gently touching her nose to his cheek, then gave a small growl, the kind she used when she was happy. Her tail wrapped around his leg like it belonged there. They sat in the valley for hours, saying nothing, letting the cold wind pass gently over them. But peace didn't last long. That night, Laura's ears twitched sharply as they sat beside the fire. She stood quickly and sniffed the air. Ethan followed her outside, weapon in hand. Shadows moved between the trees. Not wolves. Not her kind. Humans. Ethan froze. A search team. He could see the blinking lights of their helmets and the shape of rifles, moving slowly toward the cave. "Laura," he whispered, grabbing her arm. "They're human. My people." She stared at the lights, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped back. Ethan turned to her, confused. "It's okay, they'll help us." But she didn't move. Instead, she touched his chest with her claws gently, then pointed toward the cave. He realized what she was saying. She thought they were a threat. To her, to them. Ethan turned again, this time seeing clearly. The human soldiers weren't coming to rescue. Their weapons were raised. They weren't calling out for survivors. They were hunting, probably tracking a heat signal. Probably thought the alien girl was an enemy target. He had to act fast. He waved his arms in the air, stepping out into the snow and shouting, "Hold! Your fire! Friendly, friendly!" The soldiers stopped. One of them aimed a light at him. "Ethan Cole?" The voice came through a speaker. "Yeah, it's me." The soldiers approached slowly, rifles lowered but not relaxed. "What the hell happened to you?" Ethan glanced back at Laura, who stayed half hidden in the shadows, ready to run. He looked at the soldiers again, and lied. "Enemy forces are gone. I survived alone, just trying to stay warm." They scanned the cave briefly, but didn't go inside. Too cold, too dark. They believed him. As they pulled out a transport beacon and called for a pickup. Ethan looked at Laura again. Her eyes were locked on him. She didn't trust the others, but she still trusted him. He walked back to her and pressed the blanket into her arms, whispering, "I'm not leaving, not without you." She stared at the blanket for a long moment, then slowly, she nodded. In her world, that blanket wasn't just fabric. It was love. It was home. And Ethan had just promised to stay in it. The dropship landed the next day. cutting through the soft white sky with a heavy engine roar. Human soldiers spread out across the snowy clearing, wearing thick armor and scanning the area with heat detectors. Ethan stood quietly beside Lura, holding the blanket between them. She didn't hide this time. She stood proudly, her fur gently swaying in the wind, her sharp eyes watching every move. "Evac ready in 10, the team leader said, walking up to Ethan. "You're lucky to be alive." "Any hostiles left?" Ethan looked at Lura, then shook his head. "No hostiles." The leader frowned, staring at the strange girl beside him. "And her? She's not a threat. Looks like one." "She's with me," Ethan said firmly. "She saved my life." The man didn't argue, but his face said he didn't like it. "Hey, Q's not gonna like this." "You're bringing back an alien?" Ethan didn't blink. "I'm not leaving her." Lura didn't understand the words, but she stepped closer to Ethan, wrapping her tail gently around his leg again. The move made the nearby soldiers uneasy. "She doesn't belong with us, Cole," the commander said. "She's not one of us." Ethan looked up at the sky. The storm had passed. The stars were visible now, so far away, so silent. He thought about what the war had taken: friends, peace, trust. But this girl, this alien, had given him something back, not just warmth, not just protection. She had given him belonging. "I don't belong with you either," Ethan finally said. The team argued, tried to push him toward the ship, but Ethan stood his ground. Lura growled softly when they stepped too close. "In a day." And they backed off and left a beacon for him in the snow. "You've got 30 days, then we call it abandoned." When the ship lifted off and disappeared into the sky, Ethan stood silently as the snow swirled around them. Lura leaned against him, resting her head under his chin. She didn't say anything, just purred gently. They returned to the valley with the glowing flowers. He rebuilt the shelter, stronger this time. With her help, they made a warm den using both alien fur and human tech. The blanket burned, patched, and torn was placed in the center like a symbol. It wasn't just a blanket anymore. It was their nest. The days became calm. Lura showed him how to track small snow beasts, how to dig under frozen trees to find heat roots. Ethan taught her how to repair solar cells and store power. They shared food, shared silence, shared dreams. And at night, when the fire burned low, she would curl up around him, tail and arms tight around his body, and breathe softly into his chest. To the outside world, he was just a lost soldier. To her, he was something more. He was home. One evening as they watched the sky together, Lura pulled something from her pouch, a single ice blossom, glowing soft blue. She pressed it into Ethan's palm and touched her forehead to his. Then she whispered something. He didn't know the word, but he understood it. It meant forever. And Ethan whispered something back. "I'm not leaving." In the distance, the human beacon blinked softly in the snow, counting down the days. But in the cave, where the fire crackled and the blanket lay folded between them, the only thing that mattered was the warmth they shared. A blanket, a bond, a promise. And in that cold alien world, the human and the werewolf girl had found something the war could never destroy. Love. And the nest they had made together.